You said before that it wasn't a big jump to passive house or a big difference in multifamily. So what would you say was different for you, or what you had to learn or get used to?
Yeah, I mean, the biggest items that are not typical in our design are the very high efficiency ventilation system.
Welcome to the Passive House podcast, brought to you by Passive House Accelerator, a catalyst for zero carbon building. For news, inspiration, and connections from all flavours of Passive House, check out passivehouseaccelerator.com. Sign up to receive regular updates about events, get your questions answered, and contribute to the community dialogue. There's loads of free information for experienced professionals and people just starting out on their Passive House journey. We hope to see you at one of our weekly Passive House Accelerator live webinars. In the meantime, here's this week's Passive House podcast. Welcome back to the Passive House podcast. I'm Matthew Cutler-Welsh, coming to you from Auckland in New Zealand, back in Auckland after a quick visit over to Australia. And with me is Zach. Zach, how you doing?
I'm doing great. It is amazing in Seattle right now. So beautiful.
And we've also got with us Mary and Ilka. Mary, how are you?
I'm great. Just got back from the Passive House Canada conference, which was great.
Awesome. Perhaps we should find out a little bit more about that in a moment. We've also got Ilka. How are you going down to Philadelphia?
Good. Everything's good here. Beautiful weather as well.
Nice. So yeah, lots been on. Mary, you just got back from Canada. You were there in person?
I was there in person, and as well as I was excited by the number of younger people that were there attending the conference in person. That was exciting.
Any exciting projects or particular presentations that captured your attention?
Probably the one that's most in my mind at the moment is because I went to the see it in person, is the modular building in Hamilton. That was just exciting to see the modules there on site, and it's affordable housing, social housing.
Yeah, I mean, from my mind, I always, when I think of Passive House Canada, I always think of Vancouver comes to mind first and foremost, just because I think we've had a lot of news from there, and I think Passive House Canada itself has had a lot of influence. So it's great to see more stuff around Toronto and across the rest of the whole country.
Absolutely. Hamilton and Toronto are leaders on the eastern half of the country. I mean, Vancouver is so well known, but it's really impressive what's going on in Hamilton and Toronto as well.
And this time last week, I was in Sydney and presenting on a couple of sessions. I was fortunate to get to talk. One of those was about the Passive House podcast, which was pretty exciting, something new for me, talking about what we've been up to here for the last couple of years. So that was all good. And Zach, great to see your face on the big screen. A lot of people very, very happy to see you, and it was a highlight. A lot of people mentioned to me, and I've seen some posts in LinkedIn since then of highlights from the Passive House conference there in Sydney, and your presentation was definitely one of those. A lot of people talking about punk.
Solar punk, yes. Passive House and solar punk. Yeah, that was fun. On Friday, got to present with a whole bunch of friends in Portland, the Passive House Northwest conference in person, which was super great to be in person again. And then had the opportunity to travel across the Pacific via electrons to present in Sydney, which was really fun.
It was very, very refreshing, different kind of take on kind of the state of the world. And I also really like your framing around popular movies and the visions of apocalypse.
Yeah, it's pretty. We're really good at imagining apocalypse. We've got that down for sure.
Meanwhile, it was flooding again here this week.
Man. Yeah.
But I like how you kind of wrapped it up with a bit of a call to action and a reminder that things are pretty bad, but there is hope. And I think that it's quite good to have that global perspective again, that reality check, because we get down in the weeds, which is also fun in these conferences, talking about details and particular projects, but really good to step back and say, why are we doing this, and what's it all part of, which you did really, really well. This week's episode was a bit of a geek out, which I really enjoyed. Mary and Ilka, thank you for bringing us a pretty amazing engineer to talk about what she gets up to. But before we get into that, we've got some sponsors to thank.
We do indeed. So everything we do at the Accelerator, including the Passive House podcast, comes thanks to our sponsors. So a big thank you to our founding sponsors: 475 High Performance Building Supply, Baxter Ingwe Architects, Minutair, Mitsubishi Electric Train HVAC US, Partel, Rockwool North America, Stocorp, and Zola Windows. Thank you too to our champion sponsors: Bewizo, Icon Windows and Doors, Intelligent Membranes, PH Air Seal, Proseco, and Source 2050. And a big thank you to our stakeholder partner, NYSERDA, the New York State Energy Research and Development Authority.
All right. Well, this week, Mary and Ilka, you brought us a great interview with Emma Raymont, who's the Director of Engineering at MaGrann Associates. Really enjoyed listening to this. Let's get straight into it.
Welcome, Emma Raymont from MaGrann Associates. And can you tell us your title there?
I am the Director of Engineering. I'm a licensed professional engineer in several states. Been doing this for 20 years. I think that's about right.
Congratulations. And you had a somewhat unusual start to go into engineering. I understand that you got your BA from McGill in Jewish Studies and History. How did that lead to engineering?
I didn't know. I had no idea when I graduated high school what I wanted to do with my life. And I was just interested in history. I was actually always a science kid in high school, but I took a gap year and they didn't defer acceptance into the sciences at that time. So I had a great time doing undergraduate work. And then I moved to New York and worked for a not-for-profit, as one does when one has a degree in history. Doesn't want to be an academic. And I've always loved cities. I grew up in a house I actually grew up in the middle of nowhere on the West Coast in a house that my dad was always building. And so I've always had a sort of interest and love of buildings, and living in New York. I just like the whole infrastructure of the city and was just fascinating to me. And I really, and because I had no money, I was living sort of on the edge of neighborhoods and sort of on the edge of development and sort of seeing how that worked. And so somebody wise counseled me if I was going to go back. I sort of was going to go back to school and do sort of urban development or, something like that. And as a master's degree, and somebody said, well, if you can do the science, do an engineering degree. You might be able to do something. You may have more opportunities. And so I did. And so I got a degree in engineering from Drexel as a slightly more adult student. Had a baby in the middle of that. I actually took my son to my graduation and had some very interesting things about being pregnant and nursing at Drexel, which where they were like, we have no rules about these things. So, whatever you want. I still count, engineering rooms. I was recently at a design seminar for Mitsubishi's like diamond builder design tool. I was the only woman. And I think there was 2 other people of non-white male person, in the room. So yeah, still got a ways to go on the engineering front. Yeah, and I started working for MaGrann actually part-time while I was finishing my degree. I through friends, I don't know if you guys know Ben Adams, who works with the Kia, sort of advocacy work on the MaGrann side. He's sort of on our advocacy and business development side, and he's a longtime friend. So I started working at MaGrann part-time and sort of got sucked in. So, and I've always, I guess, on the energy efficiency side, that was always a piece of MaGrann's work. And I've been sort of somewhat tempted over the years to go into sort of other, mainstream MEP work, but I'm much more interested in the sort of the kind of work that we do at MaGrann, which is much more sort of mission driven, energy efficiency focused. And so over the years that has developed. I've done a lot of things at MaGrann. I sort of, initially sort of straight MEP design work. And then we were always sort of a residentially focused firm. And in the mid 2000s, when the sort of bottom fell out of the residential market, we started doing energy auditing. So we started to do some individual house energy auditing, and then worked with some of the utility programs in New Jersey doing larger building energy auditing and retrofit design. So now I sort of do a little of both of those worlds and sort of provide support for energy efficiency retrofit work, as well as for our new construction work, which we only take on projects that have some sort of above code goal in mind, right? So more of those have been passive house in recent years, and we're in I don't know where we are in the cycle we have a very large passive house project on the outskirts of DC, which you probably have all heard about, the Hillendale project with Duffy and the HOC, Housing Opportunity Commission of Montgomery County in Maryland, which is back in for permit after a major structural redesign, and excited to get that moving and looking at the next phase of that, which I think will also be a passive house project. We've done a couple of other sort of net zero projects. I don't know that we've actually certified any other passive house projects on our design side, but our consulting side does more of that we talk to them about that too.
I think we would definitely really like to hear a little bit more of the Hillendale project and talk a little bit more about it. I'm really excited to talk to you specifically because you're representing the engineering perspective. Typically, we hear more about the design side or the consultant side. So, but I guess, how did you get into passive house? Like, and are you certified?
I am not certified. I have a professional engineering license in several states, so I'm certified on that level, but I am not a passive house designer. We do on our consulting side have passive house folks that are certified, and John Jensen, and I don't know who else has got various certifications, but we sort of collaborate on that. So we have chosen not to do our design team on that side. Open to we discuss it. So that might happen in the future. So, because our mission-driven firm and have always looked at projects that have an above code level of compliance or goals, passive house was sort of a natural step to look at. And we have worked initially with some, like years in the past, with some single family that were sort of designing to passive house. We've done some retrofit work, as part of the HMFA stuff in Pennsylvania, where everybody all of a sudden was doing passive house for a while. So we've done some consulting on that front, which was sort of designed to, but not fully there. And we've been, we're really looking for a full design passive house project, because we really wanted to get into that on the mechanical design side. And we've got a history with the Duffy companies that developed Hillendale. We've done a lot of lead work over the years, and we had done lead work with Duffy in the past, this whole complex of buildings and several projects. And so when they started on this, they asked if we were interested, and of course. So that's how we got there, sort of following both our mission and our clients as they progressed. And it's been the Hillendale process has been a long one. And we were in at the ground floor on the sort of initial charrette work, which was God knows how many years ago. And it's been a really, it's actually been less different from a normal design project than I expected, right? Or that one might have expected. It's actually, and maybe this is, because it's multifamily, it's maybe less challenging to hit the goals. I know that's typically true. So the differences are less drastic than some of our other work. And also given the sort of advances in code and requirements for ventilation, particularly that we have been seeing in the market and in the code compliance world. Everybody who's doing 2018 code, you're required to use some sort of energy recovery ventilators for a lot of your spaces anyway. So some of those differences are sort of going away in terms of challenges.
Just for people who don't know what the Hillendale project is, is it still, I know it's multifamily with some use on the ground floor level, right?
Correct. Yeah,
Is it still 11 stories? Can you give us?
So the Hillendale project it's a joint development between the Housing Opportunity Commission of Montgomery County, Maryland, and the Duffy companies. Housing Opportunity Commission had a site that they wanted to redevelop that was senior housing, and that has since been torn down. And this is the site for this project. And there are two towers, both 11 stories. One of them is age restricted, so it's replacing the removed senior housing in that site. And the other tower is a non-age restricted. We call them AR and NAR, non-age restricted and age restricted. Both are 11 stories. I can't remember the unit mix count off the top of my head. The age restricted is slightly less. I think we're at around 500 to 600 total units. There is amenity space on the lower level of both, and also on the top floor, some more amenity on the non-age restricted. There are a couple of pad sites that are sort of shell work for us. They'll be future developed. There's a big garage in between the two buildings. And there's a commercial space also on the bottom of one of the towers which is also a shell design for us. There's a pool, there's a lot of solar, there's a lot of car chargers, and there's
Pool indoors or outdoors?
Indoors.
Wow, so that's a very complicated mechanical ventilation setting right there.
Yeah, it sure is. Yeah. And we'll see how that all flies. We actually that's not an area of, that we do a lot in indoor pools. So we've had to sort of learn on that one and, bring in consultants and, there's a lot of good vendors and people out there who are willing to give you time. So been lucky with that.
And there's also a calculator for that, right?
Several.
I've actually looked at that calculator before. So you said before that it wasn't a big jump to passive house or a big difference in multifamily, but I'm sure there was a little bit of a difference and a little bit of a learning curve, right? So what would you say was different for you, or what you had to learn or get used to?
Yeah, I mean, the biggest items that are not typical in our design are the very high efficiency ventilation system, right? I mean, that's one of the big ticket items. I mean, one of the things that isn't a huge learning curve for us because we've done so many high performance multifamily buildings over the years is a lot of MEP people, especially MEP people who do not focus on multifamily, often are oversizing their equipment in apartments, especially. And because we've done a lot of lead work in the past, we've already sort of jumped that hurdle. And we're quite comfortable with the lower loads we're seeing in these apartments. And we're still struggling with finding equipment small enough for the loads that we're finding. So some of the challenges that we have with this is that, it's not exactly bleeding edge work, but it certainly is leading edge. And we know that the vendors of some of this equipment are still trying to keep up with finding what we need, right? So, we've been talking a lot with, Mitsubishi in particular about like, when can you get us a half-ton unit for heating, cooling in apartments? Because especially with the very high performance ventilation system serving the apartments, like the load associated with ventilation is also gone, right? So not only is the wall load and the shell, all of that is very low. We sort of eliminated the ventilation load. So there's so little to be done on that front. And there've been some really interesting conversations about, we've got a generator system in both of these buildings, and it's going to run our big ERV systems that serve all the apartments. So, from a resiliency perspective, like how long can that system maintain the building at temperature before we start to sort of compromise what it's like in the building? I think we've determined that we'll probably run out of diesel before the building gets too hot or too cold. So yeah, it's some interesting sort of calculations that are not typical for us in terms of looking at deeper dive into humidity in the apartments is another one that we don't typically do, but have certainly done here, looking at what that ventilation system, which runs continuously, will do to maintain sort of humidity levels, and putting in humidity sensors and some of those kind of systems to sort of make sure that we are addressing humidity loads when we're pretty sure those systems and those apartments aren't going to run all that often.
How about internal gains? I've heard on multifamily that's sometimes an issue that gets a little bit underestimated. So there's quite a bit of overheating happening.
Yeah, we definitely are aware that, these buildings tend to be cooling dominated, especially internal corridors. So it's been an interesting one on that front. We actually are due now that we're in the process of issuing another set in the next week or so, and then we're going to sit down with the passive house consultant and compare loads. And look to see if we've, so we did this earlier on in the process, but things have sort of evolved. So we're going to do another round through that. Our corridors, interestingly, so we are doing heat pump water heaters that are located in corridor closets and venting into the hallways. So we've got a little extra cooling boost there that we've gone back and forth on how do we account for that, right? It's not constant, so you can't sort of account for it in your peak load. But, when that's not happening in the middle of the night, you probably don't care so much if your hallway temperature floats a little bit. So we're providing systems in all of those spaces that have cooling capacities and will be running. Again, like how to use small enough systems, and you've got these long residential corridors. How do you serve them in a way that you can ensure you're getting good distribution of air and all of those kinds of things?
It's so interesting what we've learned in the passive house community about how buildings operate. Like Ilka was saying, it's been evident that there's overheating in multifamily buildings. And also, I've heard Lois Arena talk several times recently about hot water use. It's been known for a while that the hot water use is often underestimated, except for in senior housing. So you have two towers that are, I wonder if you're
treating them differently.
Are you treating them differently?
So the systems are the same. We're using heat pump water heaters in both towers. On the non-age restricted side, which is a market, it's not an affordable, it's a market-based property. So all of those have their own heat pump water heater, which we basically put in the largest sort of residential appropriate water heater there, so that we would be able to run as much as possible on the heat pump and not have to kick out to the electric resistance side, which is the challenge with these tank, hybrid systems. You want them to run on the heat pump side. So we put in big ones to make sure hopefully we won't be running electric resistance a lot there. We also did spend a lot of time up front designing the locations of those closets and the bathrooms and all of that to ensure we've got not very long runs to all of our fixtures, so we don't have a lot of losses in that piping, right? And we chose these individual systems rather than a central system, which you could do, right? So as to avoid that loss, and also for the individual metering component that we wanted to accomplish, especially on the market-based side. On the senior side, they're not paying utilities. And so we're actually doing shared heat pump water heaters, which we actually considered on the other side as well, because we actually think that we've got, certainly on the senior side, we have more capacity in these units than we need for like a 1-bedroom senior apartment does not need its own 80-gallon heat pump water heater. So on that side, we are sharing them. So one unit for essentially 2 apartments. And they are on a house meter because anyway, you're sharing them. So how would you do that? And anyway, this is not there are individual meters for the apartments, but they are not being billed to the residents. They're being billed to the housing authority or to the Housing Opportunity Commission who runs the building. But the ability is there to monitor, which they wanted to be able to see how people are using things. But yeah, we are treating them a little bit differently, and acknowledging that, seniors don't use all that much hot water.
So would you be thinking about all these efficiencies, even if it wasn't a passive house? I mean, everyone should, right? But passive house, going through certification always makes you do these things, basically, because otherwise you can't certify. So I just wonder if that's something that's a typical practice for you, or if this was more enforced by going through certification.
Yeah, for sure. Certification makes you check the boxes and really make sure you're doing the work properly. I would say, some of the other certification programs require some of this stuff, but maybe not all of it, right? And some of it's optional, right? So, length of line runs from hot water heaters is something we've certainly done on other projects, but not always mandated, right? So that, those kinds of things are certainly, it's good. I mean, we work in certification work, so, we try to follow those rules, even if they're not being certified. And to be honest, most of our projects are certifying for something. So we're trying to do those things anyway. But sure, passive house is requiring some of those, more detailed checks on ventilation efficacy and, the hot water line losses. And it's good to know that the entire team is sort of on the same page about these things, right? Like, we're fairly confident that when you build a high efficiency building, you can ensure that you can put in small heat pumps and be comfortable. But having a certification process that ensures that actually is going to happen in the field makes us feel comfortable, because oftentimes engineers oversize things because you never know how it's going to get built, right? They're not going to do it right. So we're going to put in something bigger just in case, right? Engineers love their, percentage, fudge factors to make sure that you don't get sued later because there wasn't enough heating. So, definitely good to have that insurance of a really rigorous program that's watching. So yeah, that makes us all feel much more comfortable that what we're doing is going to work.
Yeah. I have two more technical questions. One is, did you have a say in the solar heating coefficient of the windows? Because that goes very much hand in hand with sizing the equipment and the risk of overheating, or is that something that the consultant basically decided and you had to react to that?
There were certainly some conversations early on about this. I mean, we're lucky that the consultant is, very in tune with the mechanical equipment selection and load calculations. So I think it was a joint effort there. So yeah, I think that was a collaborative approach.
Good. And then the other question I have is about exhaust hoods in the kitchen. What did you do and what is your take on that? Because I know that there's a lot of discussion about indoor air quality based on cooking exhaust.
So the client had a really strong opinion on this project. So I don't know that there was going to be a choice on this one. So they feel really strongly about individual hoods exhausting to the outside. So that's what Hillendale has. I actually am sort of in the same camp, I would say, because it does provide really, you buy a good hood that properly covers your range, you really are much more effectively exhausting all those, cooking, burning, whatever, smells, gases, et cetera, even though we're using, all electric. It also allows us to be more efficient and size more appropriately with our ERVs. I do a lot of existing building work. And so, the sort of 25 CFM out of the kitchen, I can tell you how many nasty kitchens there are in existing multifamily buildings. So I feel like I prefer it's another penetration, it's another piece of equipment, but I think it actually is better for total CFM work, in and out, because it's intermittent, it's not continuous. So I that's the approach here, and I think it's actually my favorite approach too. So
that's a perfect segue into me asking you about your deep energy retrofit work, which would really love to hear more about. And nasty kitchens are a huge problem in existing buildings because it just hasn't been paid attention to, the indoor air quality there.
It's true. Yeah, unfortunately, we do less deep energy and more energy retrofits. So I don't always get to do what we might most want to do on some of the energy retrofit work. Some of them, yes, we've been able to sort of fully redesign and put in hoods and do that. We're working on a project like that now where the client is really on board. And we're seeing some more of that, more in the sort of, more with clients that are very mission driven. We do a fair amount of work in New York with local law requirements, and more in DC now with some of the BEPS requirements, and seeing some of that happen. Unfortunately, the ventilation retrofit piece is really a challenging one. So we have been, COVID actually has been very good for ventilation in terms of having people be much more interested and cognizant of that. So we've been able to do more ventilation retrofits, but more of that is just trying. A lot of older multifamily buildings actually have ventilation systems, which is not always the case, right? Especially with single family and things like that. So that sort of shaft with a fan on top, being able to properly seal those and put car dampers, constant air regulators on those intakes so that the bottom unit actually gets some ventilation, and not just the top units get ventilation. So that's more what we see on the energy retrofit side. We have done one and maybe two are proposing ERVs for those to take those fans off and put on ERVs and supply, but usually existing buildings are not set up for that, and it's a fairly big cost implication to retrofit to that style.
So what would you say are your more common measures that you're implementing on multifamily buildings where you're doing energy retrofits, maybe not deep energy retrofits? And also sort of within that question is, do clients ever come to you saying, plot us out a phased retrofit because, we can't afford to do it once, but we want to see what the pathway towards a better building would be.
So we're seeing more of that I would say, again, in the New York and the DC kind of marketplaces where there's an energy performance requirement going on. So with the local law requirements in New York, we're doing a lot more of that consulting for long-term compliance, right? Because we can get you through your short-term compliance by a control system and some LED lights and maybe a new boiler. And we do a lot of that. We do a lot of high efficiency boilers and controls, and if it's low rise, insulation, and lighting. Like those are the sort of straightforward. It's not totally low hanging fruit, but it's business as usual ish, right? A boiler for a boiler, you're still burning gas or oil or whatever. We have done several electrification projects, and I think that's where a lot of our long-term planning work is going, right? In the short term, we will tune up your boiler and put in controls and, whatever those other, maybe we're seeing like electrification of domestic hot water as maybe a first step in a lot of these New York City projects, which is interesting. So a lot of interest in heat pump water heating at scale, not just at individual water heater level. So that's coming up a lot. And we've done some mostly on garden style, not on high rise, although we've proposed several and put together plans for several high rise electrification. So VRF heat pump systems serving all the apartments. I haven't been able to implement one of those yet. Those are definitely long-term capital planning items. So I'm not going to say they won't happen. It's just that it hasn't gotten that far yet. But individual apartment electrification, we've done several, where you've got a garden style complex where you can put a unit in an attic and a unit in a basement or a crawl space and duct up, duct down, put in an individual heat pump on the out, a ducted system. And those have been really good and have performed really well. And interestingly, ownership teams find it attractive also because of the ability to take the heating cost off of the owner meter and put it on a tenant meter, which raises issues if you're in affordable housing, right? With, does that increase the cost of heating, of, overall usage for a tenant in an affordable situation, which, there's a lot of discussion about that out there in this world. But from a performance perspective, it really, if you look at the BTUs saved, and even dollars saved, to be honest, on these, it's really been very gratifying to see that our projections were good, and we've even exceeded some of the savings projections we've put in place there. So,
and do you see that kind of work gets a lot of incentives? Is that something that you or MaGrann gets into and can help with?
Yeah. So yes and no. So that we do a lot of work in New Jersey with the utility programs that provide energy efficiency dollars. And there are some pretty good programs in New Jersey that do that. Also in New York and Connecticut also both have New York and Connecticut have very good electrification incentives. New Jersey's in sort of a transition phase right now. They'd gone through transitioning all of their energy efficiency to the utilities and away from a state-run program. And the utilities are arguing about how to incentivize electrification. There are several gas-only utilities in New Jersey, which make this a whole political battle about how you incentivize electrification. With the new, federal act that was passed and money being available for electrification, we'll see how that shifts and how that money gets into play. And there certainly is a desire to make that happen in New Jersey. So, and in the past, when the programs were before the current round of programs, we did the couple of the electrification projects we did in under one of the utility programs, and we were able to get some really nice incentives for the owners for those. So yeah, it's definitely helpful. I'm not sure people are doing a lot of that on their own dime without any incentive. But again, like the performance requirements in DC and in New York are pushing a lot of people in that way. And there are some dollars to support that.
Going back just briefly to, your day-to-day work, you are director of engineering. So in your project teams that you manage, I'm just curious about what size of the team and how much of the direct engineering you're doing versus managing the kind of overseeing the projects.
So I do both, right? We are a growing company, and the goal is for me to do less direct engineering and more oversight. And so, but at the moment, I personally am in a little transition around that, or the company is in transition with how we're moving our resources around. I like to be able to do some of the direct engineering. So, at the moment, I'm not terribly unhappy about the way things are, because it's nice to keep your finger in the real, the actual work, as well as some of the oversight pieces of it. But I am getting pulled more into, how do we determine cost effectiveness and savings protocols and all of that kind of stuff on the retrofit side. On the new construction side, we do have a very nice engineering team I don't do a lot of, manual JA calculations anymore, and I don't do Revit, and most of our work is in Revit. So we have other people who are doing that, and I'm doing a lot of the client facing interaction and review on that work. So.
And just quickly before you have to go, where does MaGrann operate? Is it all 50 states or within the
So I would say mostly East Coast. We like to say we're like climate zone 4 or 5 experts, right? So that, it can be very different, right? If you're working in Florida or California or far northern Maine. So we recently merged with a Connecticut firm and a New York firm. So we used to be sort of more Pennsylvania, Maryland, New Jersey, and, trying to go north and trying to go south. We recently opened a DC office also. So we are sort of, I guess, Virginia to New England at this point, which we also do some work in Ohio. So, in that neighborhood, we've done couple of projects. We do a little bit of consulting work in Chicago and in Hawaii and various other places, sort of following clients. But that's sort of our main market.
Great. Well, Emma, it's been so wonderful to talk with you. Thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah, thank you so much. And will I be seeing you at the symposium, the sustainability symposium soon?
One of the things I'm texting on in the background is about who's going to the sustainability symposium today. So I hope to be there. Yeah.
Good. Because usually that's where we run into each other, right?
Yeah, indeed. So.
Awesome. Thank
All
you.
Right, very good. Nice to meet you, Mary. Nice
Thanks.
to see you.
And that was Emma Raymont, Director of Engineering at MaGrann Associates. Let's kick off from you, Ilka. I could tell that you were excited as a fellow engineer to bring Emma on. What's the highlights for you?
Yeah, I was really excited to bring her on and just get a little bit more of the detail, because it's something that we deal with all the time, with even on single family. And the one thing that made me really happy was to hear that she is also struggling with heating, cooling distribution, because we're lowering the loads all the time, which is awesome, but the equipment is not really laid out to distribute in bigger spaces. And, for her, it was like long corridors in multifamily buildings, but I feel like it's the same on single family homes, where it's been really hard to find someone who can design a system that basically keeps the low loads, has small equipment, but can actually distribute the heating and cooling far enough.
Most of the time, we end up using pretty small heat pumps connected to larger size air handlers on the inside. And they're connected to a ducted system.
Yeah, I thought it was really fascinating and a bit of a call to suppliers, to product suppliers, to get on board and say, hey, there's an opportunity here to supply smaller output units because passive house changes everything in terms of what's required for a same volume of space. And if you're just sizing a unit based on the floor area, that's not going to cut it if it's a passive house level of performance. And it seems like there's a lack of options at the moment for those small load heat pumps, and also lots of work being done, lots of development and research going into heat pump water heaters as well, as that focus comes on just electrifying everything and having these fully electric homes. Some interesting opportunities there for product suppliers. How about you, Mary? What were your highlights?
Well, it was great to have her emphasize the mission of their organization, that they have an energy efficiency focus, and they have from the get-go. And it's because they've always worked on only above code projects that the leap to passive house wasn't that challenging for them. But also just to hear about, some of the minor complications that she's learning about in addressing the large passive house project at Hillendale.
I'm always really encouraged when I hear about any company that draws that line in the sand and says we're only going to work on projects that are, even if it's just saying only above the code, or some go all the way and say, well, we're exclusively a passive house firm. It may not be to that extent, but just saying, making very clearly, if you want just a code compliant house, we are not the company for you. And it's great that there's a growing market for that, and service providers, engineers, architects, professionals have more confidence to make that statement and attract the right type of clients, which is really cool, because that's how you get to work on the cool jobs. Zach, highlights from you?
Well, one was definitely her sharing that achieving passive house just isn't that hard. And I think she attributes that partly to the fact that they're doing multifamily buildings, which, is maybe easier to achieve passive house performance than for a single family house. But it's just just another reminder that this is, while there are all sorts of really great benefits that come with the passive house buildings, it's not some, crazy hard task to make these happen. And so I think that was kind of the context. And then, yes, there are challenges, and it's interesting that some of the challenges have to do with encouraging and teaching engineers to size equipment smaller, and then to find that equipment. But the actual, engineering and design and construction of these buildings to achieve passive houses, her observation is it's just not that hard.
I thought that was a really interesting point about the part of the value of certification is that there are more checks and balances, and it gives the designer more confidence to design for performance, as opposed to assuming that what's going to be built is going to be over-spec'd because it may get changed or something later in down the line. So there's all this kind of extra inefficiency when there isn't the quality assurance of something like passive house. Whereas if you are designing to a standard and everything is dependent on other things, then all of those specific details really matter. And I guess the contractor, the installer knows that they're going to get checked. They're going to install what's actually designed. So there's a much better alignment between the performance outcomes and the design specification, but then also what actually gets done on site, including not over-speccing things that isn't necessarily. So I thought that was interesting. Range hoods, really glad you asked about that, Ilka. I'm not sure if we're starting to settle on a consensus of reticulated versus recirculating versus external vented range hoods. What was your take?
Well, I think I'm with her.
Yeah.
I definitely, whenever I start a project, I just put in an exhaust hood into my WUFI model right away and just account for it and tell the client that I would always choose, this value of indoor air better indoor air quality over the energy efficiency in that case. So, I think it's just something that needs to be accounted for right from the beginning, and then it's not seen as a penalty in energy performance.
Are you installing and specifying systems that close when they're not operating?
Yeah, you definitely need a damper, right, in your exhaust hood. For the kitchen, you need a backdraft damper that closes when you don't use it. And then a lot of times you also need makeup air. So, and that you have to supply with a damper as well so that it closes when it's not in use.
Right. And presumably those dampers need to actually close as opposed to just being a flap of plastic that.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, we use specific specifications that have been proven to be pretty airtight.
Right. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I know that's a bit of a perpetual question when it comes to both new build and retrofits as to whether there is a place for recirculating range hoods. I think it's probably a little bit dependent on the building type as well. I can imagine there being more of a use case for externally vented when you have multi-unit dwelling, because there's a risk if you have an integrated system that you're going to smell whatever the neighbour is having for dinner. So it might be case by case, but I intuitively, I mean, I haven't done any PHPP design myself, but intuitively I would sort of probably lean in that direction as well to prefer an externally vented system. Something else that popped out for me is I'm really glad you asked her about long-term or planning for retrofits, but also came into new builds about the idea of helping people plan an upgrade for the long term. And Emma pointed out it's relatively easy to give advice for short-term improvements to a home, but it's the long-term plan that can be quite tricky, but I think really, really valuable. And I hope that's an increasing work area and service demand for people to think about what is the best option long-term for existing buildings. It's hard work because there's so many things to think about, and it can be expensive, and you kind of got to schedule things. But I think it's a very interesting field that's opening up. And at the end, Ilka, you talked about the sustainability symposium. So we should mention that when we come on to events coming up, but do you want to just give a quick overview of what that is?
Yeah, so the Sustainability Symposium is organized by Green Building United, and it's going to be at Drexel University here in Philadelphia. And yeah, Philadelphia is such a great community, and the symposium is always a place where at least once a year we all get together and see each other, and that's where I typically run into Emma as well. So I'm looking forward to seeing her.
Well, I just appreciated the level of detail that she got into about the water heaters, that even they're thinking about how to ensure that they're not running on electric resistance circuits, to have a large enough heat pump water heater so that, because, most of them are designed to run on heat pumps unless they run out of hot water, and then they go into electric resistance, which of course eliminates the performance advantage of the heat pump. So I just really appreciated the thought that went into, let's size them big enough so that they won't go on electric resistance. And also the detail of the age-restricted tower having a different water heating system than the non-age restricted tower, because that reflects an understanding of how the buildings can perform differently for the different populations that are going to be planned to be living there. So
yeah.
Also dependent on how it's going to get metered, right? I think that was my takeaway too, that how connected the use of the building is in terms of who the landlord is and who the occupants are, and how that reflects or how that influences this whole system design. And it might not always be the most efficient in a way, right? Because she said the layout for the aging in place tower was actually more efficient than the other one.
Yeah, that's a fascinating field. There's so many aspects to that, because she also mentioned that while sub-metering can be really useful to monitor what's going on, it also potentially opens up issues around landlords wanting to then add that cost to individual tenancies, which can be a good thing, but it's something that the reminder for me was that we, as engineers, we can't assume that just because something makes sense technically, it's going to have automatically good outcomes socially or cost-wise for those who are most vulnerable. So it requires thinking about various aspects. And also, to your point, I think it's not always the case that the most efficiency isn't always the holy grail. Sometimes effectiveness is also important, or the operational effectiveness has to also be considered, as well as the ultimate efficiency of the system. So really interesting to have that look at the impact on people, because at the end of the day, it's the people in the building that the building is there for. So yeah, really cool, really interesting stuff. Thank you, Mary and Ilka, once again for bringing us a very inspiring and influential woman who is out there doing some really great stuff in the industry. And I look forward to hearing more from Emma and the Sustainability Symposium coming up, Ilka. Zach, what else we got coming up?
Well, on the Passive House podcast, we're starting to roll out a series of bonus episodes recorded at the Passive House Canada conference by Mary and by Michael Ingwe, the founder of Passive House Accelerator. They were both in Hamilton, Ontario, doing a bunch of recordings there. So keep your eyes open for that. I also want to let people know that we have this brand new YouTube channel called Reimagine Buildings. So if you go to youtube.com/@Reimagine Buildings, and we'll include that in the show notes, you can check out the latest work that we're publishing there. You'll see the brand new episode, the first episode of our retrofit series that is hosted by Michael Ingwe, which goes into the detail of a passive house retrofit of a carriage house in Brooklyn. a really cool project and some fun details. And you'll see Kevin Brennan there as well. This coming week on Wednesday, May 17th in North America, and which means it'll be the 18th for you down under, we have a project showcase edition of Passive House Accelerator Live. We'll be joined by architect Graham Irwin of Essential Habitat Architecture, and he will be presenting California Mid-Century Modern Re-envisioned Passive House in Warm Climates. Then the next day, very early in the morning, so I think pretty impossible to see live for you in New Zealand, although in Australia, you might be able to catch this late at night. We have the latest edition of Building Performance Interactive, which is our UK-based show, and that will be about retrofitting and remodeling a timber frame house to the EnerFit standard. And then the Sustainability Symposium that Ilka mentioned is on Wednesday, May 24th at Drexel University from 8 a.m. to 5:30 p.m. Eastern Time. So there are other events that are happening. We'll include a link to our newsletter that has an exhaustive list of what's going on in the community.
And Ilka, you want to give us those dates again for the Sustainability Symposium?
Sure. It's Wednesday, May 24th from 8 a.m. till 5:30 p.m. at Drexel University in Philadelphia.
Awesome.
Mm-hmm.
Well, thank you very much, everyone. Thank you again, Mary and Ilka. Really appreciate bringing us another great interview. We'll be back again next week with a regular episode on the Passive House podcast.